Hi, everyone. Today I have the honor of introducing Karla Pérez. Now, Karla has been on the front lines of protecting immigrant communities on the state and national level. She is a model for all lawyers to find our voice and use it, to work tirelessly to amplify the voice of those in need, to center the needs of the communities we serve, and to look beyond the law to effect political change through community organizing and advocacy. Growing up, Karla aspired to be a civil rights attorney, to pursue justice for marginalized communities. She was born in Mexico and immigrated to the United States, to Houston, at 2 years old. Her life changed in the summer of 2012 when President Obama announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, DACA. Karla was immediately drawn into the immigrant youth movement. And when Karla began studying law at the University of Houston Law Center, she balanced her immigrants' rights clinical and pro bono work with policy work and tireless advocacy. She took on the Texas legislature, organizing and fighting for basic dignity, safety, and protection for immigrant communities. She took on a statewide leadership role to protect in-state tuition rates for undocumented students as the statewide coordinator for United We Dream's Texas Tuition Advocacy Campaign. And when the Texas state legislature focused on passing anti-immigration legislation, SB 4, Karla was ready to respond. She stepped up to lead the opposition as the statewide coordinator for Undocu Texas. She was an intervener in an injunction against SB 4. I'll have to remind you, during all of this time, she was still in law school. And while SB 4, the law that has weaponized police and has allowed racial profiling, has largely gone into effect, there is so much that remains to be done in Texas and across the country. Karla still meets that challenge. She serves on the nationwide board of United We Dream, a national network of undocumented youth. And she'll continue that charge. She will be an Equal Justice Works Fellow, where she will serve women and children fleeing violence as a public interest immigration attorney, while remaining true to her community organizing background. And notably, Karla has done all of this. She has organized up and down the state of Texas, and she has been a public, vocal advocate when it is least safe to do so. She has done this work in the face of one of the most vile, racist, and anti-immigrant moments. She has stepped up and made her voice heard. And on a personal note, Karla, on behalf of the 16.7 million people in this country who live with mixed status families, thank you for your courage and your fight. Immigrant communities have felt the effect of your courage across the country. We know we have someone in our corner, and we know that you have a lifetime of championing success ahead of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Karla Pérez to the stage.
Thank you, Sophia, for that lovely introduction, and to the American Constitution Society for inviting me to your national convention. You know, I just started preparing for the bar exam back home in Texas, and a good study habit that I've picked up has been varying my study spots. This is supposed to help with retention, and I must say being here in DC has made federal civil procedures stick as much as I'm sure the lawyers in the room can remember. In all seriousness, though, I'm incredibly excited and honored to be here at the largest gathering of progressive legal minds in the country. Growing up, I always wanted to be an attorney, to be an advocate with and for those who find themselves oppressed or marginalized. I may not have been able to articulate this aspiration with these words at age 5, but I learned about advocating for yourself and those you care about from my parents and my community. My parents and I immigrated to the United States from Mexico over 20 years ago, crossing the border to find a safer home in Houston, Texas. I was a toddler then, and I don't remember much about our early days in the United States, other than spending the days listening to Sting and the Police out on our apartment patio in Southeast Houston and learning to love PBS. I think that's when I discovered binge watching. Over the next year or two, I got used to our new home fairly quickly, picking up English from our landlord's daughters, whom my mother babysat, and from Sesame Street. My parents were eager for me to start school, being that it was their dream for me to attend college in the United States. My first educational opportunity in this country presented itself in the form of a pre-kindergarten program at a nearby elementary school. The program was limited to children in the surrounding area and was sort of a pilot program for the Pasadena School District. My mother immediately sprang into action when she heard about this pre-K program from our neighbors. She called on her new friends to see who could give us a ride to the school since we did not have a car at the time, and collected all of the necessary paperwork needed for my enrollment. Although I was nervous about being away from my mother for even a few hours, I knew this was something very important to her, and by default should be as important to me, by the way her face shined as we made our way down the hallways of the elementary school. My mother completed the necessary paperwork for my enrollment, and as we waited for our ride back to our apartment, she spoke to me about how I was going to have fun learning at school, soothing my fears as a first-time student. That evening, my parents and I went school shopping for the very first time. And so my love of school and learning began as I was fitted for a small uniform jumper and as I paced around the aisles of the store, looking for just the right crowns to go in my new backpack. As I went to bed that night, I was filled with anxiety and excitement about my first day of class, so I tried to reassure myself with the image of my parents' beaming faces as we picked out school supplies just a few hours earlier. In the morning, my mother woke me up and got me ready for my first day of pre-kindergarten class, helping me to put on my navy jumper and my new rubber-soled black Mary Jane shoes. Since we did not have a ride to school that morning, my mom and I began the half-hour walk to the elementary school, carefully crossing the railroad tracks on the way so that I would not get my shoes dusty. When we got to the elementary school, my mother went to the front office to ask about the location of my classroom, and to her surprise, was told that I had not been enrolled by one of the secretaries in the office. The secretary, unfortunately, turned up her nose at my mother's inability to speak English, and my mother just could not conjure up the words to address the awful news about me being kept out of class. My mother was absolutely stunned that I would not be able to begin my educational journey that morning, especially since she was assured that I was enrolled in the program just the day before. We quickly filed out of the office, with my mom holding my small hand in hers, and my backpack over her shoulder as we walked towards the exit of the school. The whole walk home, my mother cried bitterly as she lamented to herself that her dream of seeing her daughter in school was to be unjustly deferred. She felt discriminated against because she could not speak English, and felt that impotence that many new immigrants to the United States experience at some point in their lives when they are made to feel lost by their inability to speak English or navigate new social systems vastly different than the ones in their home countries. Defeated, we made it back to our apartment. After a little while, my mother went upstairs to the apartment unit above ours to speak with our friend and neighbor about what had happened. Fortunately for my mother and I, our neighbor refused to sit back and let this injustice unfold before her eyes. Before we knew it, we were in a car on the way to the school district's administrative building to file a complaint about what had happened. Although attending pre-K was not mandatory at the time, My mother was desperate to take advantage of this opportunity for me to be in school because I was very curious as a child, eagerly learning everything I could from library books my parents would read to me. My parents felt that I should not be at home when I could be learning more in school. Later that evening, after we had filed the complaint with the school district, my mother received a phone call. Your daughter, Karla Pérez, is enrolled in our pre-K program, and we ask that she be present tomorrow for class. Never again would my mother let anyone take advantage of her not speaking English to keep me or our family from thriving in the country she had left her family for. I share this story with you not to fill your minds with an image of adversity many immigrant families indeed face, but rather to demonstrate the resilience and determination that guides our ambition to thrive when others tell us, no, you cannot. You see, my mother, other immigrants, people of color, poor people, women, and members of my beloved LGBTQ community are not voiceless actors. Yes, our voices are stifled by others who possess substantial advantages over us and use those systemic advantages to marginalize us. But when our voices are uplifted by those with more social capital and resources, like our neighbor who refused to stand by as a child was being denied an educational opportunity, we become unstoppable. While I was not truly conscious of being an undocumented immigrant until high school and how that meant we would forever be fighting to thrive, I grew up in a family of artists and social justice warriors. Using their talent as musicians, my grandfather and uncle, who were already settled in the United States by the late 1980s, organized local efforts in Houston to benefit those affected by right-wing government oppression in El Salvador. It didn't matter that our family wasn't from El Salvador. They were no strangers to government oppression, having lived in Mexico City all of their lives and lived by this value. When your fellow humans are oppressed, struggling wherever they may be, you show up for them in whichever way you can. When my mother, father, and I joined our family members in the United States in 1995, our lives certainly changed, but this core family value did not. Whether it was shutting down behavior drenched in machismo or misogyny, volunteering with the PTA, or showing around a fellow immigrant recently arrived, my parents taught me to be an advocate for others and myself long before I really had to put this into practice after becoming conscious of my lack of immigration status and what that meant as a young adult. Depending on your ever-patient boyfriend, now husband, to drive you around because you couldn't get a license, having to make excuses for why you could not take that school trip abroad, and being terrified that your friends would ostracize you or ridicule you if they found out that you were undocumented. I finished high school and entered college in 2011, feeling alone and scared, yet holding on to the idea that I could become an attorney. This after having read profiles of MALDEF law student scholarship recipients who shared my immigrant background while searching for scholarships that I could apply for as an undocumented student. I also found affirmation as an undocumented child of immigrants in the Supreme Court case Plyler v. Doe, which guaranteed undocumented children's right to attend U.S. public schools from K through 12 education, regardless of their immigration status. At the same time, Plyler assured an anxious 18-year-old me that something called due process and equal protection applied to everyone in my adoptive country. When I became a DACA beneficiary in 2012, I felt the urgency to share my story without fear and join immigrant youth who had been fighting for immigrant relief for years. Becoming a DACA beneficiary in November 2012 drew me into advocacy work, while also exposing the need for competent and compassionate immigration attorneys in my community. In January 2013, I began interning at the University of Houston Law Center's Immigration Clinic as a sophomore undergraduate student. Here I met attorneys who taught me about our complex immigration system and reinforced my dream of becoming a public interest immigration lawyer. Most importantly, I gained mentors who used their resources to uplift my work and provided every opportunity to prepare me for law school and for the practice of law. Even with this preparation, law school was an isolating experience, as a brutal election cycle marked by racism and xenophobia waged on and at times trickled into the classroom. For example, during my first semester of law school, I was the only person of color in one of my classes, and I felt that. I overheard conversations amongst classmates defending symbols of white supremacy and the religious freedom to deny same-sex couples the right to marry who they love. I quickly went from being an outspoken advocate to feeling disempowered as I sat in my classes during my first semester. But don't worry, my law school experience did not end miserably. As time went on, I found solidarity from new people around me, classmates like my classmate and section mate, Christina, who shared outlines with me and cheered on my work for the immigrant community, a career counselor who helped me narrow in on internships and fellowships I was eligible to apply for as a DACA recipient, and even professors who removed the ugly slur, illegal alien, from our classroom discourse. Each one of those legal professionals did not set out to speak for me once I shared with them that I was undocumented. They simply created the space for me to keep doing what I set out to do when I applied for law school, become a compassionate attorney for my fellow immigrants. As future and current attorneys, we must remember that we have the privilege of owning tools that allow us to assist others to navigate complex systems meant to keep them down, meant to marginalize, and at times dehumanize them. The power of a legal education, as our beloved dear Dean Leonard Baines always reminds us at the University of Houston, is incredibly great, and it allows us to create the space for others to thrive, as long as we do not, and I really want to emphasize this, as long as we do not neglect to center the experiences and stories of those who have called on us in their fight to assert their human rights, civil liberties, and livelihoods. Being an attorney right now, at a time when human rights and civil liberties are under constant attack in this country, means that we must look beyond what we routinely do in our law practice. For example, this can mean leveraging community support for your client in his deportation case by working with community organizers, whereas in the past you handled such a case all on your own in your office. It is a challenging time to be a progressive-minded attorney, much less a brand new attorney, who believes in justice and equity for all. I'm not going to lie to you. I do fear the uncertainty hanging over me and those who I love right now. There are days when I break down in frustration and sadness over what is happening in this country. But I have a little mantra to kind of get me through the days. As Sophia mentioned, I have a background as a community organizer, and one of my favorite chants that we usually do it goes like this: I, and you can repeat after me, I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. Right here, right now. So tell yourself that. That's something I have to tell myself very often as an undocumented woman of color. So I know, like I mentioned, there is this fear hanging over me. But like you, like each and every one of you in this room, I know my passion for justice is greater than my fears, and that we will emerge from the tough times stronger, smarter attorneys, and advocates who are primed for the fights to come. Thank you so much.